Hi, thank you so much for coming. We are so excited to see so many people here. I'm Sarah Satullo. I'm Deputy Director of Community Development for the city. Make sure you grab some food. We are going to be diving into the presentation soon. If anybody needs the restrooms, they're right up the hall. And we are just really excited to share the first 6 months of work of our comprehensive housing strategy with all of you, our community and our partners. Just so excited that we're all going to be able to gather together and go through this. It will be interactive, so we're going to be asking you actually to bring out your phones, and we'll be kind of explaining how to do that in a little bit. But first, Mayor Reynolds is going to kick us off.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank everybody for coming today and all of the work that you do on the front lines. One of the things that we talk about in City Hall is that we aren't the ones that are doing all of the work. We are doing some of the work, but we are standing and we are working with you. And when we talk about housing, as you're going to see here tonight, is we have a housing crisis. I don't need to tell anybody that is here, but the data you're going to see that we have collected over the last several months is going to be reflective of that. And the first time you see it, to some people at least, it's a bit surprising just how deep our housing crisis is. We talk all the time about it's not about us wanting to feel like we're helping people, it's about actually helping people. And I know that's the way that when I look out and I see so many familiar faces, that's the way you are as well. We talk about it, it's not just about opportunities, but it's about outcomes. How do we move the needle? How do we help people out? And how do we put together a comprehensive housing solutions plan? We have been breaking up this information into a series of meetings because there is just too much information to be able to share at one time. But the bottom line is that we are going to need to work together. There are some things that we're able to do in our city, but we also are going to have to work as a region for what is the biggest issue that is facing the city of Bethlehem and the Lehigh Valley. Bethlehem has always been a place where you've been able to move no matter what your income level was. That's what Bethlehem Steel was about. That's what the city has been about for hundreds of years, and that is at risk. We understood that when we came into office last January, and I am joined today by, I think, probably about 10 to 15 different city employees between our Community Economic Development Office, the Mayor's Office. I see Kristen Wenrick, our Health Director here. There are a lot of employees here that are committed to this work as well. So I just want to thank you again for being a part of it. We're going to go through the presentation. Sarah's going to make a few comments here before we go into the data. There's going to be an interactive piece, and then we're going to answer some questions. The last thing I would say is make sure on your way out the door, if you did not have a chance to take a look at some of the banners that we have up there. Some of that data is different, or I should say additive to what is going to be up here in the presentation, and it just helps to paint that picture. And I guess the one thing that I would tell you as well is like what you think is happening as far as rents and sales prices and things like that, it is happening in the city of Bethlehem. And we need to really set that expectation level first before we're able to talk about that work. So once again, thank you for everything you do on a daily basis. Thank you for coming out and being part of tonight. Thank you.
So just to kind of set the stage for this evening, we're really trying to start out with sharing all the data, what we found, and as the mayor said, like what you're anecdotally experiencing in the market, the data is really going to bear that out. And then in the coming months, we're going to be working on actually refining the strategies and solutions to these problems. So this is just the beginning of our community conversation about this. And when we get to the point that we have kind of our actual recommendations and strategies, we are going to bring them back to our community. So what we found is that Bethlehem has one of the hottest mid-sized real estate markets in the country. The secret is out. We've all known for a long time that Bethlehem is an amazing place to live. But the discovery by others has meant real pain for many in our community. Rents have skyrocketed as the prices of food, gas, and utilities have soared. Home buying became an Olympic sport where locals are pitted against out-of-town buyers flush with cash. We all know the housing crisis is hitting Bethlehem hard, and we feel its toll in our community each day when our friends and family and other residents share their struggles. This is why housing affordability is the top issue for all of us working in Bethlehem City Hall. So last year, the city hired the Reinvestment Fund, Atria Planning, and Collabo Planning to help us find the best affordable housing solutions for our unique real estate market. And Mayor Reynolds' first budget, enacted by City Council in December, includes Bethlehem's first $5 million allocation to implement these data-driven affordable housing solutions that we will identify through the study. Our goal is to find the strategies that help the most people possible while taking into account the complexities of our unique housing market and our local housing needs. We know that the Lehigh Valley has a shortage of units, and it's driving up costs for everyone. Nationally, our home prices remain quite affordable, but our rents are rivaling major metros, as you'll see later tonight. So why is that? For many years, our real estate market remained incredibly affordable, partially artificially depressed by the closure of Bethlehem Steel. We've rebounded spectacularly. An economic recovery that the coronavirus pandemic has accelerated to new heights. We've seen a pandemic-driven shift in work and life norms that mean that we have pools of people from New York and New Jersey who now are considering Bethlehem and the Lehigh Valley very attractive places to live and work. And these folks that are relocating here are accustomed to much higher cost of living than we traditionally have been. So this surge of demand has worsened a housing shortage that existed before the pandemic. Unfortunately, there are no easy overnight solutions to this complex problem. Bethlehem has little available land. We do not have many blighted properties, as you'll hear later. And overall, our housing stock quality is much higher than similar cities. When you start in such a strong place, there are no easy solutions. And this is where the Reinvestment Fund team comes in. They help communities across America use data and local input to solve these complex issues equitably. Our presentation tonight will dive into Bethlehem's housing needs and the opportunities and challenges we face trying to meet them. We will offer a second update on these strategies under consideration to City Council on March 7th, and then late in the spring, we're going to return with our final report and recommendations. So tonight, our excellent team is going to walk you through all the work that we've done up to this point. And all of the data and information that you'll learn about tonight will be crucial as we work with the city and our housing strategy committee to vet and prioritize the strategies best suited for Bethlehem's unique real estate market. So now I'm going to turn things over to Adam Rosa from Collabo Planning to talk about the first part of our plan's development.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. It's Wednesday night and you packed the house for a housing meeting. So give it up. Give it up. Thank you for the Fowler Center for hosting us here tonight. This is a beautiful facility. So my name is Adam Rosa. I'm with Collabo Planning, and I'm part of the team that's helping to assess and develop strategies for the housing issues and challenges that we have here in Bethlehem and that you're going to hear about tonight. Personally, I spent about 10 minutes before the meeting looking out the window, and I think it was Bob Dylan who said, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." If you look out the window, you can kind of see it all unfolding. You see the hillside, very beautiful and natural. You see the river, kind of constrained geography and topography. You can see new mixed-use development right here on 3rd Street. You see Bethlehem Steel about a block away, so the remnants of the industrial past. I actually grew up in Buffalo, New York, where we had another small little steel mill, Bethlehem Steel. I think it was the 4th largest in the world. So you see all of this happening. You see the aging housing stock that you have, but very tight. Overall, there's not a lot of room for new development and new growth. So we're gonna kind of throw a lot at you today. This is really the foundation for the study. So we want to really tell you about the challenges that we've found through data analysis and through community engagement. And from here, we're going to start building the house on that foundation with some different recommendations and strategies going forward. But we also want to make this interactive as we go through tonight, because we know sitting in a room hearing somebody talk for an hour is not the way that we all want to spend our Wednesday nights. So we want to get you involved in this conversation and get more feedback as we go through the presentation. So we did the welcome. We're going to do kind of an overview of what this study entails, a summary of the housing needs, talk about the existing conditions that we all see here on the ground in Bethlehem. Talk a little bit about the community engagement that we've conducted over the last 6 months, and then we'll have a chance for next steps and questions. So typically when you go to a meeting like this, the person up here says put away your phones and put them on silent. This is a little bit different. So we want you to pull out your phones if you have them and if you want to participate. So pull out your phone, open your browser, and right at the top of the screen there you can see the site. It's www.menti.com. So when you go to that, there'll be a window that opens and it'll ask you for a code. The code is 8530-3931. So I'll give everybody a minute or so to put that in. And as we're going through the presentation, you'll also be able to see the slides on your phone if you want to take a closer look. Okay. So menti.com, 8530-3931. All right, we got people thumbsing up the slides, so that's a good sign. All right, so this is what we call a softball question to make sure that you all know how to use the technology. And I'm really curious if anybody is going to stick their neck out for the Chiefs on this one. So who's going to win the big game on Sunday? Is it, and I have to say big game because the NFL won't let you call it the Super Bowl. Is it going to be the Chiefs? Is it going to be the Eagles? Or you don't care and you only watch for the commercials? So as you guys put your votes in, you can see at the bottom of the screen, there's been 54 people that have put their information in. So far, we got only 63% think the Eagles are going to win. We got about 11% that think the Chiefs are going to take it, and 27% are just going to watch the show for the commercials. All right, so you all know how to use this now. So our first question, you guys packed the room tonight. We want to know why you're here. So we have some choices on the screen. The first is you're interested in learning more about affordable housing challenges. The second is you want to hear the results of the community survey that many of you probably took. The third is you may be looking to purchase or rent a property within Bethlehem and you want to kind of know more about what's going on. The fourth is you're interested in learning about tools for affordable housing preservation and development. The fifth is you're concerned about the lack of available housing, affordable housing to Bethlehem residents overall. So with almost 50 votes in, over half the room is here because they're very concerned about the lack of affordable housing for Bethlehem residents. So thank you all again for being here. We're going to tell you more about how that challenge is unfolding through some of the data analysis. Okay, so our housing plan goals. We want to develop a housing strategy that is data informed and understands the local housing needs and current market conditions. We understand that the market conditions aren't just within the city limits of Bethlehem. This is a state issue, this is a national issue, this is a regional issue, and it's a city issue. So we're assessing the different trends from all of those levels through this report. We want to factor in the economic, fiscal, and political realities that could really define the course of action. So again, we're building that foundation. Once we get to the next stage in the process and we're starting to roll out some strategies, we want them to be realistic and achievable and implementable. And so we want this study to help make progress for people within the city, given the prevailing market conditions that we're going to discuss here today. Okay, so the study overview is really a four-part series that we've conducted. The first is housing, addressing the needs. So understanding the overall housing needs for different incomes, different races and ethnicities within Bethlehem, ages and household types. The standard family with 2.3 children, living in a single family home, that's not how everyone lives anymore. That's not how the majority of people live anymore. So there's different trends that are taking place that are impacting housing demand. We want to understand the prevailing market conditions. So we've taken a look back at 2017, 2018, and compared it to where we are today. And you're going to see some drastic changes in the local market here. We're going to be reviewing regulatory, which is city policy, and development capacity. What could we realistically build in a city that's this dense and built out, and where could it go, and how is that going to work? We want to understand the community perspectives, which is why we're asking you questions here tonight, and why we've had a community survey and other engagement events over the last 6 months. And ultimately, identifying key issues and potential strategies are going to come out of this portion of the plan. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Rothenberg, and she's going to go through the housing needs assessment. But keep those phones handy because we will be asking you a couple more questions in a few minutes. Rebecca?
Thank you, Adam. So before we jump into the data, I just want to give a high-level summary of what the needs are. I'm shorter than you. High-level overview of what the needs are, and then talk about housing needs in a general context, talking about the regional housing needs and how that relates to national trends. I think none of this is going to be too surprising. What Bethlehem needs are more affordable units. When I mean more affordable to the residents who live in and around Bethlehem. There's been a big spike in rents, and so quote-unquote naturally affordable rental units have been lost in the market. There's very few available, less than $1,000, and rents are spiking at oftentimes 50-80% rent jump in 1 year. And that's a pretty big crisis. And you'll see later on what that means in terms of vacancy rates and turnover. You're also losing a lot of your affordable homeownership stock. So folks who want to transition from the rental market into homeownership are having a really tough time because home prices have jumped roughly 50% in the past couple years. And that means you're also not releasing those rental units so that folks can move into them. So there's a bit of a bottleneck because they can't transition into homeownership. You are also seeing an increase in demographic in baby boomers entering into their senior years and persons on fixed income having a really hard time dealing with inflation and increasing prices. It's acute for renters. It's also significant for homeowners who are not able to make the repairs or pay for utilities because of cost rises in other areas of their lives. And then you've seen it on the ground. We've heard about it from all of the stakeholders and service providers. Homelessness is always an issue. It's become even more of an issue with these price increases. There are working families who are now at risk of experiencing homelessness, of eviction, and those who are, at the lower end of their income are really struggling to make ends meet, and any little hiccup in their lives can derail paying for rent. So homelessness and prevention of homelessness and addressing homelessness for families that this may be their first time experiencing it is a growing concern. And finally, as Adam said, what do we do about it? Obviously, we need more affordable units, but there are some serious challenges to doing that. Notably, a lack of areas to build and the cost to build. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and then Elena with the reinvestment will show you some maps illustrating that. To talk about housing from a regional perspective, there's been a surge in demand. This is nothing new. It happened before COVID. COVID exacerbated it. We are in an area within 1 to 2 hours of large metropolitan areas, something like 30 million people within a 2-hour area. And so when you have flexibility in where you can work and you want to live somewhere with a high quality of life and more affordable housing, the Lehigh Valley goes to the top of that list. So when you're feeling this pressure, that's because people who are living in very high-priced areas find the Lehigh Valley to be quite affordable. But what that does for the residents who live here is now they're dealing with price increases because the supply does not meet the demand, and it's very difficult to increase supply because of the situation we're in with COVID, increasing labor costs, supply chain issues, and then overall land prices. So We're at a point where, yes, we do have roughly 8,000 building permits issued, but they're not built yet. It's going to take a long time to build them. And even when they are built, they're not going to be priced to meet the target market that is historically the Bethlehem market. So we're in a position where there's a gap between what folks who live in Bethlehem can pay and what products are coming online. And I mentioned all the reasons why that is. Also, the developers can build more expensive homes because people are willing to pay for that. And maybe it's not here, maybe it's from other places, but like we mentioned earlier, you have a lot of relocation that is expected to happen where people are moving into the Lehigh Valley, and you have job growth. And so you end up with not a lot of product that's priced in what Bethlehem historically is known, which is home prices roughly around $250,000 and rents less than $1,400. Like, that is not coming on the market with these building permits. And this gets to the bigger issue that's come up a lot with limited land. There's a larger conversation that we should be having with our regional partners and how to address housing demand from a regional perspective, using the available land that exists and lining it up with where the jobs are going and where there's infrastructure and transportation. So this kind of like paints the picture of vacancy rates at less than 2%. Healthy is usually like 6%, is generally like a strong but stable rental market. Less than 2% doesn't even mean that 2% is for rent. It just means they're not occupied. What's available is even less than that. There are units that have already rented but are not occupied. When we did a survey of what was available, it was virtually nothing. And then when we also looked at the price points, hardly anything under 1,000. I mean, when I did the survey, there was nothing under 1,000. I think, Adam, you took a look maybe a couple weeks later, and there might have been one unit under 1,000. And that's a big deal because that's very different from what the rental market looked like, say, in 2018. So that change has had serious ramifications in terms of the stability of long-term residents and housing. I wanted to take a step back and talk about defining affordability, just because some people think of affordable housing as just public housing or just vouchers, but there is a range of incomes that fit within that spectrum of affordable housing, and it goes all the way up to middle income housing. So even middle income housing is harder to achieve in Bethlehem than ever before. And just to put it in a dollar figure, the very low income category, which is a HUD definition, is equivalent to less than 50% of area median income. An area is defined as the metropolitan area. These are HUD's definitions. And for a one-person household, that's $30,000 a year. And for a family of four, that's $45,000 a year. So these are a lot of the workforce and people that you know who are getting priced out of the market and would be considered very low income under HUD's definition. And in perspective, like, it's based on the region. The region is fairly wealthy. Median income is roughly $90,000. And so Bethlehem has lower income than the region. And so the majority of residents in Bethlehem would, based on HUD's definitions, be low and moderate income and are facing extreme pressure and being priced out of their own cities. So this just illustrates the share of households by income. And you can see the very low income renters and the low and moderate income renters, roughly 40% of all residents are getting priced out of the market based on rent trends. Those who are in homeownership, if they already exist in homeownership, it's a bit more stable. But the low and moderate income renters who would traditionally enter the homeownership market aren't able to do so because of the price increases. And a lot of people just end up staying, so you don't have the turnover of units. I don't know if you can see the cities, but the 3 lines that are below the red and then jump over the red, that's the Lehigh Valley. The green line is Bethlehem. And you can see right around the peak of COVID, Lehigh Valley got more expensive than Philadelphia. So to put that in perspective, Philadelphia, which has historically been a more expensive place, people have moved here for more affordable housing options, is now more affordable than the Lehigh Valley. And we see that in the data, and we also hear it when we're talking to people about why rents are so high and why they can't move because they can't find a place that they can afford. This just illustrates the change between 2019 and 2020. Because of the way prices have been, it's always been challenging for very low-income households to afford housing. But before COVID, if you were making less than 80%, if you were considered low income or moderate income, you could afford to rent and you could afford to buy. And now, in 2022, you can't afford to rent. You can barely afford to rent even if you were middle income for the region. And homeownership is also really hard for your moderate income households. And historically, Bethlehem has been a place where you could be a working family and afford to buy a house, and that is no longer the case. We also give a summary of what that looks like in terms of your workforce. So these are service industry workers, hospital workers, those who work in your schools, who drive your kids to school, postal workers, essential workers for a community, for a city to survive. And the wages make it really hard to afford housing in this market. So most of the positions here are facing challenges. And we have, 1,000 some jobs, and it illustrates that, where you could once afford housing, you no longer can because of this rapid change in pricing. This also has a pretty significant impact when we're talking about equity issues, looking at race, ethnicity, and homeownership rates. We see that regardless of income, homeownership rates are higher for white, non-Hispanic households. And what that means is if you're a homeowner, you are a little bit more buffered by these price changes because you already are set in the home that you purchased. But if you are a renter, you face displacement, you face eviction, you're more at risk of eviction, and that disproportionately impacts African American, Hispanic, and Asian households. And then, of course, we've talked about it before, but homelessness is always a crisis. Anyone who is homeless is facing crisis. We are seeing more families with children at risk and or experiencing homelessness. We're hearing escalation in homelessness among children within the Bethlehem Area School District, and we're hearing it from supportive service providers that there's an increase in homeless families. So that is a need that is relatively new. That increase during COVID, and we're also seeing an increasing need for ongoing supportive services, particularly with the addiction spikes in the past 5 years, and Bethlehem being a college town, also attracting a lot of younger adults who are experiencing homelessness. This just shows you the numbers of the households who are challenged by the cost of housing, broken down by tenure, so renters and owners. Just among renters, you're looking at 6,500 households who cannot afford housing. This is based on HUD data that helps communities plan for housing needs, and it's pretty severe. And this is relatively dated. I think when the next figures come out, it's going to be higher. And I'm using this to frame the conversation of what the need would be. Like, to even address the needs of all the renters, just the renters who can't afford housing, will cost roughly $50 million a year. Well, the city doesn't have that, and no one can actually plug that gap. And so just to frame the conversation, we're not here to solve the problem. We're here to have everyone understand the problem and figure out what we can do with the tools that we have. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to
Yeah, it's just
Adam.
an easy question. So, hearing what you just heard over the last 10 minutes, do you feel the city should be allocating significant resources to addressing affordable housing challenges? So it's a yes, no, or a not sure answer. And we'll give everybody a minute or two. But I can kind of already see how this is coming in. So we do have about 6% that say no. Does anyone want to talk about why they don't think in a room full of housing advocates that we shouldn't be allocating significant resources?
I'll answer that.
Yes.
So, I guess in my mind, the reality of civil government should be to administer the law, and the role of the private sector would be to own the real estate and manage costs so that we can keep those whatever units affordable.
Right.
So I feel like it's a private sector burden, should not be a municipal burden.
Thank you for the comment. Okay. You want to move on?
Sure. And with that, I am going to hand it over to Elena with the Reinvestment Fund, who's going to talk about the markets within Bethlehem and the variety with a series of maps. So, Elena.
Hello. So now Rebecca talked a lot about, overall in the city and then the region, what we are really seeing in trends for the last five years. So now I'm going to delve in and use this tool called market value analysis, which is analysis that we do all over the country. And this is really, trying to pick apart a city and trying to understand, how your neighborhood might be different than the one that's 5 minutes away, like 2 blocks away. It can be all different and have very different characteristics. And based on that, you're going to have different strategies to tackle their own problem. And that's what we're trying to get at. And this analysis uses, a series of the municipal data, for instance, like sales data as well as code violation, things like that, to really capture what is the current housing market and housing conditions that we are seeing today in Bethlehem. So this is the result of the analysis. So we categorize different parts of the city. The unit of analysis that we use is census block group level. So you can see, very small parts of the city all broken out into different colors. And you see in the legend that we have from A market to F market, and A and B market in different shades of purple is what we would consider strongest markets, and that's really based on the price points. And then we have C and D market, the blue markets, which you would call middle markets that are relatively stable. And then we have E and F markets, which we would normally call distressed market. But it also, in a place like Bethlehem, especially what's been going on in the 5 years, you might not, see it that way. It is really just markets that have weaker price points than compared to other ones. And, just to point out, we see, the downtown historic district area, we see very dark purple, that's the highest point market, we're seeing the high sales prices there. And then we see, the Northeast Bethlehem and the West Bethlehem mostly being, B, C, D markets. And you really see, the E and F markets being part of the, the South Bethlehem surrounding Lehigh University, as well as right there on the Market Street adjacent to the History District. And I will just point out this link if you, wanted to sort of explore more of these different parts of the city and their data. You can go in there, and it's an interactive map, and you should be able to click around different parts of the city, and it will show you exactly what the data point says about that specific place. And we also, some of you might know, but we also completed a same study for blight remediation back in 17 and 18 for Bethlehem. And because we have the data from then, we were able to sort of compare what has changed in the last 5 years, which is a very critical time in understanding housing market change. So, we're just showing the price, because price, really often becomes sort of the baseline for understanding the housing market condition. So here you're seeing the green boxes are where the middle 50% of the sales are happening, or the sales prices are. So you see in 15 to 17 that you see 3/4 of the homes in Bethlehem sold for less than $180,000. That would be the top of the green box on the first graph. But we see just within 5 years, we are seeing in 2020 to 2022, 3/4 of the homes in Bethlehem sold for more than almost $160,000, and that would be the bottom of the box on the second graph. And if we are putting that term in terms of the median sales price right in the middle, the median sales price in the 15 to 17 was about $140,000, and now we are seeing the median sales price about $200,000. That's a really big increase in 5 years. That is, that amounts up to 43% increase. And to also bring back the point that Rebecca was making about this place reasonably or relatively being more affordable than within the region, when you're looking at compared to New York or Philly, the national median sales price for home sales would be close to $400,000. So you can really see how that alone can really attract a lot of buyers into this market. So using the metric we just developed, we also sort of look at the affordability for housing, and then as well as the displacement risk. And I will just show you. So we are trying to understand at different levels of household income, which areas are you probably reasonably expected to be able to afford? And affordability here is to buy a home. And by affordability, we really mean like 3-to-1 ratio, where your house should be maybe 3 times of your annual income. And if you're earning about 80% of the CMI, which is the city median income, that means you're earning around like $45,000. There's nowhere you can comfortably afford. That's today, or in the last 2 years. If you're earning 100% of the CMI, which would be about $55,000, you have little bit of places opening up, but you see that those are the orange markets, so like lower end of the market, and you still don't have a lot of choices. That's really limiting for people who are looking to buy homes. And then we go up to 120% of CMI, and that's $67,000. You see a little bit more around downtown opening up, a little bit of central Bethlehem opening up, but still it's very limited. And we go all the way up to 150 CMI, and that's $85,000. That's a lot of money for some folks and households. And we still see, a lot of the areas in the northeast Bethlehem not being really available. We do see some more areas opening up, but it's, it just sort of shows when you're looking to buy homes and you're earning less than 150 CMI, you really don't have a lot of choices. And now we're moving on to thinking about sort of displacement risk. And I will say this measure is developed using the sales data. So it is sort of tracking the home sales price change over time. But we often, see that rent prices track home sales price as well. So it could really also talk to or speak to sort of the changing pressure for renters and evictions and things like that. So what we are trying to really capture here is involuntary aspect of displacement, meaning that you're not choosing to move to a different neighborhood or out of the city. You're sort of forced out because of the circumstances that are beyond your control. So like maybe you have a mortgage, but and you're pretty comfortable with that, but because of the rising prices, you all of a sudden have you have like much higher property tax, so you no longer can afford to stay. Or there are a lot of investors wanting to move into your neighborhood, so they knock on your door and ask and offer cash for sales. So things like that that you have no control over, but that could build pressure in your neighborhood that will eventually force you to move out of your long-term home. And so so the sort of the key point here is the long-term residents. We are not really talking about newcomers. We're talking about people who were able to afford house in this neighborhood 5-10 years ago. Can they still afford to buy in this neighborhood? That's what we're trying to understand. And so in 2021 to 2022, here the map shows from the red to all the way to blue. The red areas are where we consider very high pressure. That means when we compare the household median income from 2010 and the housing prices now, it's really hard for those folks to be able to afford in the same neighborhoods. And if you notice, we see a lot of the dark red areas, the areas that are showing the highest pressure, meaning highest pressure for displacement, are some of the areas that have been traditionally more affordable. So that maybe moderate to low income folks were able to afford or were able to live there. But we are seeing those areas being really threatened by this housing pressure that's been building for the last 5 years. So these two tools, MVA and DRR, displacement risk ratio, are two very place-based tools, analytics that we have to be able to use that can inform our strategies. Again, what we want is to be able to have very targeted and set of strategies that are going to be better for a rental community as opposed to a homeowner community. Things like that. So going forward, we should be able to use these to really help us decide, what are some of the areas that, strategy A might be better for as versus, B. So things like that. So I'm going to turn it back to Adam.
Thank you. So we need to understand that data is not only what comes out of a computer and shown on a map, but it's also what people think, feel, and perceive about what's happening in their neighborhood. Because we all know that people make personal decisions on how they think, feel, and perceive what's going on around them. So we wanted to cast a wide net through some community engagement during this process. The first thing we did was a series of pop-up meetings everywhere from Lehigh University to the Kellen Mobile Market to I think we did a trick-or-treat event. We wanted to reach all different parts of the city and different audiences and ask them questions. So one of the things we did was we gave people Bethlehem bucks, and I think we had 6 different strategy buckets, and we asked people to prioritize how they would spend their money. And the top 3 answers from the pop-up meetings, people wanted to prioritize housing and services for the homeless, number 1. Number 2 was homeownership opportunities for lower income working families. And then number 3 was housing for the mentally and physically disabled and folks with substance abuses. So that's based on 300 plus respondents at our pop-up meetings. We also did a larger community survey, which hopefully many of you took over the fall. I think we had 3,100 responses, and much of the information is in the banners around the room, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. The city did an awesome job getting the word out and getting 3,000 plus people to take a housing survey, so I got to take my hat off to them. But a couple of the things that really stood out to me, about 1/3 of the people that took the survey said that their properties that they were either living or renting in needed major repairs. So that's 1/3. And over 1/3 of the people that took the survey said that they, in the last year, fell behind on either a mortgage or rent payment. It was about 37% of the people that took the survey. So those really stood out to me and kind of express some of the challenges on a personal level that folks are facing related to housing. We've also had a series of focus groups and interviews with different people that are in the housing space and also other partners, local universities, healthcare, workforce. We wanted to be able to kind of take their temperature on how they saw how things were playing out. A lot of these focus group meetings have helped to inform some of our initial goals that we're going to be rolling into more detailed strategies down the road. But we wanted to give you all a chance to also prioritize. Many of you probably took that bigger survey, but we want to get a little bit more input here. We want to, we'll give you about 5 minutes to do this one. So we have 8 different options here, and the question is, what are your overall priorities? And you can rank these 1 through 8 on your phone. So we have rent stabilization of current units that people are renting. We have adding new units to the market. We have rehab of existing homes in the neighborhoods. We have addressing homelessness, and remember that was the top ranked during the pop-up events. We have the regional housing planning and connecting housing to where jobs are located. We have, things are shifting around, right? Okay. We have addressing senior housing needs. And we have additional on-campus student housing to take some pressure off of the areas around the university. So we're going to give everybody about 5 minutes to kind of rank these. This is just another data source for us. And this will help to continue to inform our priorities moving forward. So it looks like we have about 8 people that have completed. We know they're all important, but we want to get a sense of the ranking from your personal perspective. And we'll also share the results of this with the presentation that gets posted on the city's website if you want to take a look. All right, so as the votes are coming in, it seems like addressing homelessness is still a top priority amongst the folks in this room. Rent stabilization of current units just took the lead. Oh, okay, back and forth. Affordable home ownership is number 3 at the moment. This is fairly interesting. The student housing issue seems to be the lowest priority to deal with overall so far, with 56 people haven't taken the poll. Okay, so I'm going to ask somebody who ranked addressing homelessness number 1 why they ranked it that way. And I'd just like to get a little feedback. Yes, sir.
The freezing temperatures, living in the Northeast, I just don't understand how people live a homeless life here in the Northeast. It's so cold. This winter, I guess maybe wasn't as bad as other winters, but it's still unbearable to be outside without a jacket more than like 15 minutes. It's crazy how people do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in Allentown as well. It's where I live.
Thank you. Anyone want to talk about just affordable home ownership in general and why they think it's the largest need? Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said rent, so that.
Oh, you can jump in on rent.
So, where I work, we have, city housing, so subsidized housing. And the wait list is like over 3 years long, and it's not even open.
You're talking about public housing,
Public
housing authority?
Yeah. So, people are so desperate to have an affordable place to live. There's 15 people living in an apartment, in a home. And it's affecting everybody. It's affecting the kids who go to school. Sometimes kids aren't going to school because there's so many people up at night living in the house. It's just, so I just think that that's the most, just a stable home, a stable place to eat and live and study, and just, it sets you up for success. I think
Absolutely.
that's just so important.
And what neighborhood are you living in?
Pembroke.
Okay.
Bethlehem Housing Authority.
Thank you. All right, we're going to continue on here. We have another opportunity for questions and feedback right at the end. Okay. Rebecca, we got a couple more slides, so bear with us.
So where we are in this process is we're just starting to look at the strategies. We're working through a list of strategies around different priority areas, but we can sum up what is needed, which is, can you make it cheaper to build, or can you make it cheaper to add new units? And how can you get the money to fund new units? So these are sort of the general buckets. Leverage means working with other sources of funds so that you get more impact using the resources that the city has. And there are also partners that the city can work with, including the Housing Authority or even other jurisdictions. There are some regions where they pool their resources together to address regional housing needs. So we're looking at all of these different types of strategies now, but we have considered how we can't implement all of the strategies. There are 30, 40, 50 strategies that we've identified, and we just can't do them all with the resources and the bandwidth that staff have. And so we want to consider what is most feasible and what essentially are the low-hanging fruits. Like there are partners willing to implement. There is an appetite to do these certain strategies, and so that's where we're at. We're not pushing any strategy just yet, but we're trying to figure out what makes the most sense given limited resources, limited capacity, and a certain political climate. We looked at the challenges and opportunities, and they're kind of two sides of the same coin. The opportunities are you have a lot of demand. And that demand isn't going to slow down based on projections. So people are going to continue to move to the Lehigh Valley. There's strong job growth, and there's a quality of life that's associated with that growth. And you also have less blight. So there are a lot of investors who are buying up properties that are blighted and fixing them up. You have a lot of interest in development, and you have interest in higher end housing, so developers are coming in and building higher end housing. So some of the industrial towns that have long struggled with, oh, nobody wants to live here, that's not the story for Bethlehem. But at the same time, you cannot build to meet this demand, and the cost to build is very high. And so you're seeing that extreme price pressure, and folks who have historically lived in Bethlehem and could afford housing, even if they didn't make a lot of money, are now feeling the pressure for displacement. The city has programs that they're working with right now, including incentives for adding affordable housing units, homeowner repair programs, loans for fixing up facade improvement programs, down payment assistance, and then of course the housing inspections for rental units to mitigate blight and ensure quality conditions. We're now looking at ways to augment or add to existing programs and think about new programs, strategies, or tools that the city can add to that. And they do have new resources, and then the existing resources that they work with through HUD. So we have some tools available, but as we said earlier, it's not enough to make a huge dent in the problem, but it will require partnerships with folks who also have resources. These are the 5 priority areas. We can associate them with goals as well. The strategies that we will identify will fall into multiple buckets, so it's not like for example, a lot of folks have talked about an ADU program that falls into several of these categories. But the main goal is to preserve existing affordable housing, and not just subsidized housing, the housing that was on the market pre-COVID that moderate or middle income family could afford, either in rent or home ownership. That's generally been thought of as a one-bedroom at around $1,000, and homeownership opportunities around $200,000 is sort of the numbers that we're seeing as the greatest need. That's the area that we've lost the most housing units. Also finding ways to address the housing needs of the most vulnerable when prices have spiked. Those who were renting at the lowest band of housing stock, when those prices shift up, they can no longer afford the housing unit that they're in, and they cannot downgrade because there's nothing available. And so those are the most vulnerable who are at risk of eviction, displacement, and homelessness. Also, how do you build more units or add more units? As we talked about, there's a supply shortage for land, and there aren't a lot of structures available for rehab. There's not a lot of blight. So how do you add new units? And that brings us to the other priority, which is if there's limited space, how do we look at it regionally when there is green space and jobs and a network of in and out migration of households? Are there other areas outside of the city that are appropriate to add housing units? And then finally, how do we take advantage of this high demand to promote more affordable housing development? So this is a nice place where there's a lot of interest in development. So a place as in this time period, it's a hot market. So there are certain advantages on how to take advantage of this hot market so that you do add more units, because development is happening. And I wanted to re-emphasize, we talked about it at the beginning, but re-emphasize that the city cannot address all of the challenges, and the city doesn't do like housing construction. It doesn't own a lot of land. The city has its own tools like zoning, land use, partnerships, the grants that it does have. So the goal is to use its resources and its staff and its partnerships to make the biggest dent that it can in the problems that have been identified. So that is the framework in which we're working from, because I know the numbers are so overwhelming that there can be some level of despair, but we do have resources that we would like to spend, and partnerships that would like to work towards this goal. And so the positive is, how do we do this? This is something that the community and stakeholders and advocates can pull together and come up with solutions that maybe can take a life of its own and make a bigger dent than we even anticipated. And I think with that we can shift to.
Yeah, so we're just going to open it up now. So if you have a question or a comment, plug it in. We'll give everybody 5 or 10 minutes, and then we're going to probably just try to pick some of these and see what we can do to answer some of them. So feel free to add your comments to the on your phones, and then we will take it from there. So I'm gonna kind of start pulling from these. We may need to scroll down as well, but let's talk about what an ADU is. Rebecca, you threw that term out a few minutes ago.
I'm
you wanna
sorry,
give a definition?
I'm terrible with acronyms. I work with government a long time, so it stands for an accessory dwelling unit. That can be a separate unit within the structure, like a walkout basement that is for a grandmother. It can also be a cottage or an apartment above a garage. It's basically a separate unit within a single parcel, typically a single-family parcel, where there is another unit typically available for multi-generational housing or as a rental unit. There's been conversations in Bethlehem about alley houses, which is another version of an ADU.
And I think this gets to this question here: what are some other cities comparable in size to Bethlehem doing to address this problem? Accessory dwelling units are one solution in a range of tools that are available, but it's a very it's a prominent solution that many cities of this size are starting to use, because it doesn't visibly increase density in a neighborhood because you don't see new buildings, but it technically increases the number of people that can live in the area. So that's one. Do you have any other thoughts on this
Sure.
question?
I have lots of fun. I'll just say a few. With construction prices going up, that's a national trend, and particularly when you're dealing with grant programs that fund multifamily housing, it's become really expensive to build an affordable apartment. In some markets, it costs as much as $500,000 to build an affordable apartment because of all of the constraints with the tools available for big projects. And so they're trying to find ways to lower the costs. And so modular or prefabricated housing, getting shipped in and put up lowers costs because it lowers time and it lowers manufacturing. Also, looking at the housing, looking at units that need the least amount of subsidy. So changing the size of units, and that follows the change in size of households. So there are a lot smaller households than before. There are a lot more single people who stay single for a long period of time, or only two-person households. And so thinking about non-traditional single-family homes, so townhomes, condos, smaller size single-family units like cottage communities has becoming a growing trend because it costs less to build, so you need less subsidy or no subsidy at all. And it addresses a need for access to first-time home ownership for people who are delaying starting a family. So 20s and 30s, you can access homeownership. That's another solution that some cities are implementing. And then there are some places where there are hot markets that establish requirements for affordable housing for any new development. There's some challenges to that with Pennsylvania, but that is something that other places are interested in doing. There are also rent stabilization programs, which is different from rent control. It's limiting the increase that a unit can be increased per year on a specific tenant. I could go on. There are lots.
So there was a question on the first page about education, what's being done about education. I'm just curious, whoever asked that, yeah, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, because I'm looking at all the affordability by occupation, and a nurse seems to be doable. So if people are having issues with affordability in housing, what programs, all the lists of things you showed on there to help people with housing and with rents and with utilities, there's nothing on there that said, here, go to school and learn to be a nurse, so you can afford a better place and a better life. There was nothing on there for that.
So one of the things that we have, and I've talked about this, is our biggest partner is the Bethlehem Area School District. We obviously have a partnership with them with a lot of our neighborhood revitalization programs to try and get them to understand, which they do, is housing insecurity and the effect that it has within the school district. But the bottom line is that it's like if we had like 10 bottles of water there, like we can send people to college, we can do these things. Our biggest problem in Bethlehem is a housing supply issue, and that's vacancy rate. But obviously there's a lot of things along the continuum as far as how do we put people in positions that we look at as far as our Northside Alive program, as far as Southside Tomorrow, as far as our partnerships with our nonprofits to make sure that we have that education system, that we're taking people, and especially kids that might not have parents that went to college, to be able to get into trade programs, to be able to go to college, to be able to have that to make them as competitive as possible. And it's part of the reason why we have tried to create that partnership with the school district to be able to create 18, 19, 20-year-olds that are in the best position possible as they do enter this difficult housing market.
But I'm talking about, I'm 61. I'm trainable still.
Yeah.
I mean, what about the older adults? You get into that age range where, you need to earn more income.
Yeah.
There's that. Be a nurse in 18 months now, according to that billboard on 22.
Yeah, I mean they're making great money in St. Louis and Lehigh Valley or in the traveling nurse programs.
$150 an hour.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and it also goes into the idea, and get a little bit away from housing, but it goes into the idea that just like housing, there's a lot of pandemic pressures on people, and part of the reason there's been vacancies in nurses obviously is because of what they had to do throughout the pandemic. And one thing I did not say before is part of what we're doing here is talking about how we can utilize those resources that were created by the American Rescue Plan to be able to help put into the programs that we already have going on. One of the things that we did not have an opportunity to talk about is all of the affordable housing initiatives that both the city has been doing for years and some of the nonprofits that are in this room. And what this study is about is how do we allocate those resources. The American Rescue Plan, and when President Biden passed that with Congress in March of 2021, it really created this once-in-a-generation lifetime for us to allocate resources for that exact reason, is how do we utilize those resources to be able to create kind of the most progress that we can. But it is tied to everything else. It's tied to education, and that's why we very much decided to do We Build Bethlehem, where it's basically what are the priorities of our community. And our kind of recovery plan here is not just in the short term, but also how do we make those systemic investments to make sure that we are creating a city that has an opportunity for everybody.
All right. Some great ideas on the board. Creative use of failing malls. We've discussed over the last few weeks about the possibility of shifting some commercial and office spaces to residential and what that could mean to alleviate some of the housing demand. Overall, I think Elena can address this about the market value analysis real quick.
Yeah, so the question is how can I, explain a little bit more about how we define strong markets versus distressed markets. So I would really answer that to say that we let the data define what each markets are. So, that's sort of the beauty of the data-driven approach where we sort of let the data sort of tell us what does being in an A market mean. So like overall, we can sort of summarize, which we didn't really go into super in depth with data just because we didn't want to overwhelm you with numbers. But like the live map that the link that we shared, if you go in there onto the website, you should be able to see a much more granular data for it. But I just have some statistics that I can share. Like the A market, the median sales price on average is over $400,000. And then for E or F market, we see the median sales price around $150,000. So it is really mainly, I think, driven by the price differences that we see. But we also oftentimes, prices are not in isolation with other, market conditions. So we tend to see more vacancy in like lower or weaker markets. We do see higher rates of code violations in different, households. And in South Bethlehem, you probably also know that they tend to have higher investor purchases as a share of all the home purchases happening. Another thing that we talk about is subsidy. Sometimes certain places, just because by the affordability of it, we see more subsidy being used in those neighborhoods. And I'm happy to answer a more detailed question. I just don't want to bore everyone with numbers. So
we had a couple questions here about maintenance and renovations, including energy efficiency and a reliable contractor list for landlords. Would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to weatherization. So there's a agency we partner with, Community Action, that does weatherization, not just for the city of Bethlehem, but also Lehigh and Northampton counties. So as long as you're 150% AMI, you can qualify for that program. We also do work through our health bureau. We'll do some window reglazing, which provides a degree of energy efficiency under the guise of lead paint removal. And so we try to coordinate those programs together, but that is a key priority for us in making sure that you don't just get a home, but you can afford to stay in that home. I don't know, do you want me to jump through a couple of these? Or?
If you see anything else that you want to go for it.
Incentivizing affordable units, we do look at all of the programs we have to add some kind of affordable housing requirement to get the incentive. LRTA is something that you heard mentioned on a previous slide, and so we are looking at all of our incentives to see what we can do. Pennsylvania's a bit of a challenge. We can't just obligate affordable, but we can provide the carrot to get the, what we want. Reliable contractors. We have, as a city, haven't historically put out a reliable contractor list because we're endorsing contractors, so it's a little bit of a sticky area for us just because we don't want to endorse any one business as government, so we've generally avoided that over the years. Is there any others that you can see?
I'm actually interested in this question about why are there so many abandoned properties if the rent taxes are so high?
That's a great question. We're always looking at what are our blighted properties. Sometimes houses look, there's deferred maintenance and there's challenge with them. Doesn't necessarily mean they meet the definition of blight or vacant. They've got to be vacant. And then, of course, the ones that are the most challenging are the ones that take the most time and energy. So we may have been working on something for months and months and months, and you may not see that we're trying to take it, but we've gone through an extensive process, and unfortunately, months turns into years.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And one of the challenges there, too, is the fact that Bethlehem does not have the amount of blighted property that you see in a lot of other cities. And part of the reason why is because we have an active code inspections that we become more active, more efficient about that. So when we take care of properties, when we find programs that are successful, what that does is that actually raises, it is the catch-22. It then raises the value of that neighborhood because you don't have blighted, you don't have some of the challenges that you have in other cities. You saw that graph before about the rent in Philadelphia versus Bethlehem. We have a lot of the things in neighborhoods that other people want to have, but we have been able to make the progress on them. And just one thing I want to say is there were some great questions up here about things like malls and stuff like that. I really like that because we are talking here about it's not just a Bethlehem issue. We are just one part of the Lehigh Valley. It is a Lehigh Valley issue, and we need to take a look. I said this to somebody today. We need to become as passionate about housing initiatives outside of the city of Bethlehem as we do inside the city of Bethlehem, because it affects the same market. So we should all care about what's going on with building housing in Upper Macungie or Lower Macungie or Bethlehem Township or Hanover Township, because all of that is like releasing the pressure on what our market here is in Bethlehem. And somebody had said something before about the private sector. Absolutely. A big part of what we're trying to do is find ways to have private sector solutions. But if the private sector solved all of the problems, we wouldn't be here. And not only would we not be here, but a lot of the organizations that I look around, you wouldn't exist because the private sector and the market would have solved those. The private sector does many, many wonderful things. But if they did everything, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't necessarily have these problems. But what we want to do is find out how do you use all of the strengths that the private sector has done for the city of Bethlehem to lead to our incredible revitalization, but also where do you use your resources in the public sector to make sure people don't fall through the cracks? Because when the private sector fails, when I walk into a store and I can't afford something, I have to leave the store and go somewhere else. But when you're talking about housing in neighborhoods, that's not what we want, because that means people are leaving the city of Bethlehem. And we are not going to deal with that. That's like the number one thing, is that this has always been a city. If I look around and ask people how we all bought our first house, it would not be the way people are buying their home in 2023. And that is the one thing we believe more than anything else.
Yes.
Are there any contractors in the room? People that build houses? Because that's really what we're talking about here. If you build it, they will come. The big if is you have contractors who can go right over the side of that mountain and build $1 million house and not be concerned with building in the city.
Right.
I see a lot of people that are also has been involved in our homeless study that we also took care of. Once again, another issue that we are going to do everything we can in Bethlehem, but it's also a regional issue. It's to like housing, homelessness is a regional issue. That is a problem now, and it is growing. I see Bob Rapp, who runs our BES shelter heroically every year, and we have been doing a lot. The City Council approved $2 million in our budget to help us with the location of a permanent shelter. We have allocated $1.4 million as part of our home ARP funding that is going to be spent on a homeless shelter in the city of Bethlehem, and we are making progress on that. And we are trying to put together a regional coalition. And one of the things, and I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do it yet, but this is something that myself, Mayor Panto, Mayor Turk need to work together on with our county executives and our regional leaders. As far as like, how do we solve this? We very much look at this as a continuum. The first thing is, where is someone staying tonight? Where are they going to be able to survive? But then it's, how do we get them into transitional housing? How do we get them into affordable housing? How do we get them to buy that home? And it is going to take all of us. And that first step on that is the homelessness issue, which is growing. It is growing in Bethlehem and is growing in the Lehigh Valley. If you live in Bethlehem, you understand that, and it's something that, once again, people can choose to ignore, or you can live with the consequences that are going on in other revitalized cities in the Lehigh Valley. And we are committed to that, and we are in the process of trying to determine a location.
So I see a few questions on here about affordability laws to ensure that new development is affordable or mixed income, and that's typically referred to as inclusionary zoning. Does anyone want to address that from the city perspective or the national perspective of where we are in Pennsylvania?
Well, I can tell you that Pennsylvania, I don't know if Laura or Alicia want to add to that, is Pennsylvania does not necessarily have a lot of those affordable housing mandated levers that other states have. If you've been paying attention, like California, they have this mandated zoning by which if you don't create enough affordable housing, they are basically going to just declare all zoning out the window to allow for all sorts of different building there. But that came from a mandate from the state. What goes on in New Jersey, what goes on in New York is not necessarily something that legally we're able to do. Rather than some type of mandating, it's much more of an incentive. What can you necessarily give somebody? What can you give up as far as density is concerned, as far as parking is concerned? What is it in our economic revitalization tools like LRTA that we're able to give up to mandate a portion of it? It is a different type of equation, but once again, one of the things that's come up in our meeting is that it has to be a priority for our elected officials. It's got to be a priority for our state officials. Steve Samuelson was here before, a state representative, and he talked about how in Harrisburg, they're talking about what can we do to give cities more of an opportunity to do this, more of an opportunity to be able to mandate things. But currently, we do not have a lot of those powers that you have in other states.